Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event. My name is Sam, and I am from Prosper, and we're helping to put on this event today with Nick from Teach for Australia. We just give another second or so for last comers, and as your audio sort of connects, that'd be great. But yeah, if you can keep yourself on mute for now as we sort of let everyone sort of jump in. If you feel comfortable putting on your camera, I know Nick would definitely love to see some faces and things like that, but if not, that's all good. We will get stuck into it, I reckon now. So without further ado, welcome to today's event. Today's live Q&A. We'll be doing some good questions with the Teach for Australia team, specifically with Nick from the team. I'll get Nick to introduce himself and Teach for Australia in just a second, but I would like to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. Yes, without further ado, I might throw to you, Nick, to give us a bit of an introduction to Teach for Australia and to yourself and a little bit about your journey.
Thanks a lot, Sam, and thanks to Prosper for having us today. My name's Nick. I'm the recruitment team manager at Teach for Australia, and I went through the program myself. I was a member of the 2014 cohort. I studied law, arts law at university, and was a lawyer for a few years and hated it. And then made the move into education through Teach for Australia after that. So I'll get stuck into the presentation and go through some information about the Teach for Australia program. So I'd like to just reiterate Sam's acknowledgement of country and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. All over Australia, I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne. I believe Sam's on the same land. So yeah, certainly pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. All right, so what is Teach for Australia and what is the Leadership Development Program? So our vision at Teach for Australia is an Australia where education gives every child, regardless of background, greater choice for their future. What we know in Australia is that educational outcomes differ according to postcode, and those in the most low socioeconomic communities tend to have the worst educational outcomes. So our mission at Teach for Australia is to grow a community of leaders committed to equity for children by recruiting and developing exceptional people to teach and lead across Australia. We know that the major factor that influences student achievement is the teacher in the classroom. And what we want to do is create a viable alternative pathway into the classroom for Australia's leaders. Why? Why do we do it? So we know, for example, that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students are on average 6 times more likely to be below the national minimum standards for literacy and numeracy. We know students from refugee and asylum seeker backgrounds miss out on basic literacy skills. Students from rural and remote communities are less than half as likely to go to university, and they're more likely to drop out if they do. And we also know that Australia's performance in maths and science and reading has been declining compared to 10 years ago. So that's the case for action. That's what Teach for Australia, again, is trying to solve. We also know that COVID has exacerbated the education gap in Australia. So just based on the first lockdown in Melbourne, which is going back to 2020 now, we know that that first lockdown tripled the achievement gap for students who are experiencing disadvantage. And that didn't even include the subsequent lockdowns in Australia. Now, there's really good reasons for that. So, for example, not every Australian household in low socioeconomic communities has the internet. So it's very hard to just jump on Zoom. So talking to a mate of mine who's an assistant principal at a school, they were having to literally photocopy and mail out worksheets every day. So you can see how in an environment like that, the achievement gap widens. So now more than ever, we need really quality teachers in our schools. We also know that a systemic problem needs a systemic solution, and we can't and we don't do this alone. So we need to work with schools. We need to work with not-for-profits. We need to work with governments and corporates and higher education, all to try and solve this education problem. So what we want for our alumni for the program isn't necessarily to stay in schools, although 80% do stay in schools or education. But we also need our alumni pulling levers at different aspects of society. So working for not-for-profits like Teach for Australia, or working in the Department of Education, or working for corporates who have corporate social responsibility initiatives around education. And we need to work with higher education providers as well to make sure students from lower socioeconomic areas have pathways, viable pathways into universities. So our role, what we do at Teach for Australia, like I said before, is we recruit Australia's future leaders into the classroom. So we rigorously recruit Australia's top talent into teaching. We then partner with schools serving low socioeconomic communities. And these are schools that, but for Teach for Australia, would not be able to fill that particular gap. We then train our recruits as highly effective teachers and as leaders. And this is all to improve student and school outcomes. So we want to build a pipeline of leaders within schools, but also a pipeline of leaders to drive change and innovation in the education sector more broadly. So what is the Leadership Development Program? In a nutshell, our associates, that's what we call the people we recruit to the program, our associates work as teachers with full salary and benefits, whilst also studying a master's degree, and they receive context-specific one-on-one coaching and mentoring. So over our 2-year program, you teach at a school serving a low socioeconomic community, full salary and benefits. You earn our bespoke Master of Teaching in Secondary Leading Learning, we call it the MTSLL, on an assisted scholarship through our university partner, ACU. You receive one-on-one coaching and mentoring through a teacher coach provided by Teach for Australia, an academic mentor provided by the university, and an in-school mentor provided by the school. And we hope that as a leader in the classroom, you'll share your passions with young people and act as a role model and mentor, and develop the skills and experience that will enable you to lead effectively and make a really tangible, positive difference to the lives of students in low socioeconomic communities. So in terms of the program structure, the program starts in November of this year with our 6-week initial intensive. That is partly virtual, partly in-person training program to get you ready for day one in the classroom in February 2023. Over that 6 weeks, you'll complete approximately 25% of your master's degree. Then, like I said, over the 2 years, you begin your teaching journey in 2023, and you're teaching kids in high schools over that 2 years, whilst you continue the rest of your 75% of your master's degree, whilst also getting that coaching and mentoring. You come out of it with your Masters of Teaching, which will mean you're a fully accredited teacher. You'll be able to teach in any secondary school in Australia, as well as primary school as well. So what we want for our students is we want them to achieve significant academic growth. That's primarily the reason the teacher exists. We want to close that education gap. We want them to experience, we want our students to experience increased access to opportunities. Now, let me give you an example. Where I taught in Ararat, which is about 2.5 hours west of Melbourne, during work experience week in year 10, there's a really big difference between what you can do in Ararat versus what you can do if you live in the city. So if you live in the city, you might have access to advertising firms, engineering firms, law firms, really top quality restaurants if you want to go down that way, building sites. In Ararat, some of our top students were doing it in the hardware store, for example. There is nothing wrong with that, but there are limited opportunities. So we want to see increased opportunities for access to some of those high quality learning experience. We want students to develop positive attitudes and beliefs about themselves and their learning. If students believe they can learn and they can see the correlation between hard work and results, that's half the battle. And we want students to develop aspirations, interests, and excitement that propel them forward. We don't want every student to want to go to university, but we want them to be able to make a conscious, deliberate choice about what pathway they want to choose. So primarily, we want students to have greater choice over their future. So in terms of our impact to date, Teach for Australia has existed since 2009. And in that time, we've had 12 cohorts. We've placed over 1,100 associates across 6 Australian states and territories. That means we've impacted 18,000 classrooms at 229 partner schools. That means we've impacted over 350,000 students. And if you've been following the news, we've just got a multi-year commitment from both the Coalition and Labor into the future. So that means regardless of who wins the federal election, we've been funded to continue our work into the future. So how to apply? What do we look for? Few eligibility requirements. You have to meet 4 conditions. Now, you need to be an Australian citizen or permanent resident. You need to have a bachelor's degree in a discipline other than teaching by the end of this year. And you need to be able to enroll in at least 2 learning areas. And you need to be willing to accept a placement in one of our jurisdictions, which is Tasmania, Victoria, South Australia, the Northern Territory, and Western Australia. We don't currently place in New South Wales and Queensland, but we're certainly hoping to in the future. So what do we look for? We look for 4 skills and 4 mindsets. So in terms of the skills we're looking for communication and influencing ability, leadership, organisation and planning ability, and problem solving. And in terms of the mindsets we look for, we're looking for people who are able to reflect and improve their own practice. So we're looking for learning and self-evaluation. We're looking for commitment to mission. So do you understand what TFA is trying to do and want to make a positive contribution to community? We're looking for resilience. It's a difficult program. We don't shy away from that. So we are looking for resilience. And we are looking for humility, respect, and empathy as well. People who can go into schools and work with the staff, make allies, make really positive relationships with students and parents as well. So across our recruitment process, we assess against these 8 competencies. So there's 3 areas for this. So there's the online application. So this is an opportunity for you to demonstrate why your past experience relates to the classroom and why you want to participate in the program. Well, if you get through the online application, the next step is an interview, which is conducted virtually via Zoom. That's some hypotheticals, some behavioural questions, things like that. And then the final step of the process is a selection day, where you will do a group activity, a sample teaching lesson, and another activity as well. And after that, should you make it through, you get a conditional offer to the program. Once you get that conditional offer, we then work to match you to a school based on your preferences. So we work with you and we work with our partner schools to match you to vacant teaching positions by the end of December 2022. And between the time you get your conditional offer and December, sometime around then, we'll place you. And it's a bit like Tinder. We need to match you to the right school who wants to match with you as well. So we take a lot of care in that matchmaking process to make sure you and the school are compatible. You each give each other what you need, and it's in the right location as well. So what did our cohort look like this year? We had 162 people started in classrooms this year. 62% of our partner schools were in regional, rural or remote communities. 42% of our associates moved interstate to teach. So when I went through the program, I was one such person. 100% of the schools we work with serve low socioeconomic communities. And all of our associates fill genuine teacher vacancies. Like I said, if it wasn't for Teach for Australia, schools would not have staff to fill that teaching load. In terms of when we placed people, predominantly September, October, November is our major time when the placement process starts. That's when you've got your offer. And that's when school vacancies start to come in, when they have a bit of better idea of their staffing needs for the following year. So we're actively recruiting at the moment. We're in round 2. Round 2 closes on June 19. Really importantly, we assess applications on a rolling basis. So the sooner you submit, the sooner you progress to the next stage. We also progressively close learning areas throughout the year, which is based on the number of applications we receive and historical school demand. So for example, if you're someone with an arts degree or humanities-based background, we do tend to close those learning areas earlier than, say, physics. So if you're in one of those learning areas, we would strongly suggest you get your application in. Don't wait for the deadline. Get it in as soon as possible. And on average, from the time you hit apply to the time you get your outcome, it's about 6 to 8 weeks to go through the 3 stages. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, but I would strongly recommend that you get in touch with us if you'd like any more information. And to talk to one of our recruitment and advocacy staff who are more than happy to help you and help you out with the application and answer any questions that you might have. But yeah, with that, I might stop sharing, Sam, and we can have any questions that might come up.
Perfect. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I reckon let's jump into a bit of a question and answer sort of time. And I've got a couple of questions myself that have come through via email, pre-prepared, we've done a bit of research as well. Yeah. But for any of our students who are joining us today, if you'd like to get in the question, make sure you chuck it into the chat function. Let us know whether or not you'd happy to read it out yourself, whether you prefer for me to read it back to Nick. But let's keep it a bit of a conversation as much as possible. But with that being said, I might kick off with one of mine, I reckon, Nick. It might sound quite broad, actually. Can you tell us maybe your most important piece of advice for students who are looking to go and start as a teacher within the Teach for Australia program?
Important piece of advice, I would say, is don't wait to get an application. Just because we do progressively close our learning areas, and sometimes people can only be one subject away from being eligible to teach maths or English or something like that. So the sooner you get in contact and talk to one of our recruitment staff, they might be able to quickly assess your transcript and say, you know what, you are able to teach legal studies, but you're only one subject away from teaching English as well. And that makes you an incredibly attractive prospect to schools if you're also able to teach English. So if you're able to get in touch with us and talk to our recruitment staff, that is a really advantageous thing to do. So I'll just share my screen really briefly, Sam, once more. Apply@teachforaustralia.org is our email address. teachforaustralia.org is our website. Our recruitment staff want to help you. They're not looking to weed people out. They're looking to help people get in. So if you're thinking about it, would strongly recommend going down that pathway.
Fantastic. And for students who land a job, Teach for Australia, let's say all the grads we've got on the call right now, what's some advice that you'd give them to help them survive and thrive in that first year? Is there anything they shouldn't be doing, for example? Anything they should be doing? What's typically?
Yeah, can you just cut? I think my internet just stuffed up there, Sam. So what do you mind repeating that?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, gotcha.
Yep, perfect. So on the back of that advice about applications and getting that thing in nice and early because of how competitive it can be, for students who land that job with you, they're successful through the program, what advice would you give them to make sure they get the most out of that first year as a teacher in the program? And is there anything they shouldn't do?
Yeah. Teaching is like the best profession in the world. It's so much fun. Students are funny. Time goes really quick. No day is ever the same. But equally, it is a complex profession. It takes a long time to get good at it. And sometimes our associates come into the classroom and they think that they're just going to crush it from day one. And it's okay not to be very good to begin with. And I think some people can be way too hard on themselves and go, oh, I didn't shoot the lights out on this particular lesson. That's okay. Like, you learn through not succeeding sometimes. It's like when you started cooking, you probably burnt some stuff. You probably made some inedible meals, but you get better. So I think the major advice I give to our associates is park the ego and accept that you're in a learning phase. And don't put too much pressure on yourself to get things nailed straight from day one.
Fantastic advice. I might go next to Julie's question. I might go to Hung next. And because I think Julie's question actually builds off the back of that right there, Nick. What's a typical day in the life of a teacher, specifically as part of the TFA program?
Great question, Julie. At the risk of sounding trite, there is no typical day. What I would say generally is that our associates work 0.8 and they have 0.2. So they have a full day or 2 half days to study for their master's degree. So generally speaking, your teaching load across the week will add up to about 16 hours. So that's probably 18, possibly up to 18 15-minute periods, depending on how it breaks down. So generally, your day can be a combination of teaching, admin, study, getting ready for the next day, doing all these sort of things. You might be on an excursion to Melbourne one day. The next day you might have the swimming carnival. The next day you might have 6 periods on the go back to back. The following day you might only have 1 period and a half day off where you need to go and finish an assignment that night. So really there is no typical day. And I think that's what makes teaching in the Teach for Australia program such a fun pathway to take.
Hung's asked, and apologies if I get anyone's name wrong, I'm terrible at pronunciation, just putting that one out there, but Hung's asked, what does that mean in your presentation, Nick, earlier about the 2 learning area requirements? Is that in reference to the bachelor degrees? Or?
Yeah, it is. So Hung, I would really strongly recommend you get in touch with our recruitment team. So we don't need you to have 2 bachelor's degrees, for example, and it will depend on what you actually studied. So if, for example, you just studied maths, we will be able to find you a maths placement. If, for example, you only did a law degree and you're only eligible to teach law, that's where we probably need someone to have that additional learning area. So what you can teach relates directly to your bachelor's degree. So, like I said, I did a law degree. If I'd only studied law and was only eligible to teach law, I probably am not going to be placed because I'm not going to get a full load of teaching legal studies. But I also had an arts degree, which allowed me to teach history, humanities, and media, which fleshed it out. So depending on what you study, you might need to be able to teach 2 different subjects. That's why I encourage you to get in touch with our recruitment staff who'll be able to give you some more bespoke advice. But Hung, if you want to put what you studied in the chat, where I can elaborate a bit more as well.
Awesome. My Hung does that. I might go to Thanura's question, which is, how recent of a graduate must I be to be eligible for the program?
Yeah, great question. That's another great thing about our program is we take grads, so people who are graduating at the end of 2022, but we also take career changes as well. So if it's something you're not necessarily thinking about for another few years, that's no problem at all. Some of the best teachers that I've worked with have been fresh grads who have rolled into the school with their green Ps. And some of the best teachers I've worked with have been teachers who are, on the back 9 of their career and they're in their 50s and 60s. So we will take people regardless of where they are at in their career. So as long as you graduate by the time you're 2022, that's the main thing.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what alumni of the program go on to do? Do most of them stay on as teachers? Do they go on to other areas? I think you referenced a little bit about changing, the environment of education in Australia. Is that quite common for alumni?
Yeah. So we do an alumni survey every year. So we actually have really strong data on the 1,000 alumni that we have. 70% of our alumni are still in schools teaching or in school leadership positions. That's 70%. Like I said at the start, Sam, you're not obliged after the 2-year program to stay in the classroom, but 70% are in school leadership or teaching. A further 10% are in education adjacent fields. So someone like me who works for Teach for Australia, and like I lecture at uni, so I'm still in the education field, just not directly teaching in a school. So that's about a further 10%. And 20% of our alumni go on to do other things as well. So in general, what we want is for people to have a lifetime commitment to educational equity. So even those 20% who aren't working in education, we still want them to be like supporting their local community or contributing their time or doing things like that, pulling other levers that help us solve the problem of educational inequity.
Fantastic. Speaking on your own experience, Nick, I think you mentioned you were one of the few grads who actually moved interstate for your experience. Can you tell us a little bit more about that the process of that and what sort of support was on offer?
Yeah. So I shouldn't say most, a good chunk, 62% of our people have moved to take up a position, and we certainly take personal circumstances into account, right? So like if you have to be in Metro Melbourne because of health reasons or various other things, we absolutely work to accommodate that. But I moved from Brisbane, so I did my studied and worked in Brisbane and moved from Brisbane to Ararat. I had to look it up on the map. I had no idea where Ararat was. So yeah, I got a relocation allowance from the big government. You get a stipend during the National Initial Intensive to help you with your living expenses. And even though Teach for Australia pays for your living expenses and food and things like that, you still get that stipend. And I got really just good support from my recruitment and advocacy manager at Teach for Australia, who was always at hand to answer any questions that I had about the program or things like that. So certainly felt very supported in that process of moving from Brisbane to regional Victoria.
Fantastic.
And I'll add as well, that depends. Yep. Like for the people in our program who move to the Northern Territory, there is some pretty attractive relocation allowances. Some schools offer accommodation as well, particularly schools in regional WA. have housing for staff. So it kind of depends on where you're at, but the support you get does differ, and it can be quite generous.
Fantastic. In terms of applying for the program, so obviously you came from a background of actually being in the a law firm and the like. I'm sure many of the students we've got on the call might not actually have much actual work experience or limited. Maybe it's just related to something they've done, like a retail job while at university. So is that a prerequisite of applying for the program? Do you need to have experience, whether in education in some form or just in general?
Yeah. No, I'm really glad you asked that, Sam. No, the answer is no. What we're really looking for with those 8 competencies I talked about, so leadership and achievement is one, right? We're not looking for you to have had a leadership role. You don't have to be the president of your college or the president of your club and society. We're looking for potential. We're looking for potential in this area. We're looking for people who want to make a difference. So you don't need to have any experience in education. You don't need to have been a leader with a formal title. What we're looking for is people who meet our competencies and have the potential to grow into them as well. So we want to create leaders, not just pick them up off the shelf and say, have you had this formal leadership position?
Probably putting you on the spot a little bit, but actually in terms of those competencies, have you got any examples off the top of your head that you've seen of applicants that have really done well at demonstrating that, in a maybe an unusual way?
That's a really good question. Look, what I would say is that we have such diverse cohorts. So with 162 people coming in this year, the diversity is insane. So we've had people, we have people who do arts degrees, maths degrees, physics degrees. We've had a guy who's won, who was part of the team that won a Nobel Prize in science, who did something, Sam, that I could not even, I can't explain it at all. But he was part of that Nobel Prize team. And we've had people who haven't, straight out of undergrad, who have, made a contribution to their local community in some respect. And we look at that and go, you know what, that is evidence of leadership. They've made this contribution to their community. And you know what? Both of them were great teachers. We don't need someone to have been part of a Nobel Prize winning team. You can have made a contribution to your local community and be super effective at what you've done.
Is there, in terms of applying as well, if a student has applied for the leadership program in the past and not been successful, are they disadvantaged in the application process at all?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. We've had people who have not been successful who have reapplied the following year and have got in. And we've had people who have been not accepted 3 years in a row and got in on the 4th time, and they've been amazing teachers. So what we do after the recruitment process as well is give feedback. This is why I always encourage people to talk to our recruitment team, because firstly, they'll give you advice before you put your application in. Then regardless of whether you've been successful or not, you'll get feedback afterwards. So you'll notice, Sam, one of our competencies was learning and self-evaluation. And sometimes we'll give feedback and we want to see if people implement that feedback the following year. And if you show that, you'll get into the program. So we've had a lot of really, really great teachers who have missed out the first time and got in the second time. So it doesn't matter if, we strongly encourage people to take the advice and come in again. If that's the pathway.
Fantastic. Can you tell us more a little bit about the Tinder matching, so to speak, of the school program? Is it something that students or applicants nominate? They nominate for maybe a number of different schools, or like how's that?
No. So once you get an offer to the program, you get a placement preference survey. That's where we ask you to rank where you want to be placed, from most want to be placed to least want to be placed. And we also ask for your personal circumstances, which might mean you need to be somewhere. So I'll give you an example, right? Let's say someone needs regular dialysis and they have to be near a certain hospital. 100% we will accommodate that particular thing. If someone preferences, I really want to go to remote Northern Territory and want that challenging placement, we'll talk to you, understand your motivations, talk to the schools in remote NT and say, what are you looking for? And if we can match people, we do. So basically the process is us getting to know you and making sure that we're finding you the right fit in terms of a school. So the school has to have a genuine vacancy. So if you're the principal, Sam, and you're looking for a teacher who can teach, let's say biology and legal studies, we'll look through our people and go, oh, okay, Julie can teach these two subjects. Let's see what her preferences are. Okay, she does want to go and teach in regional Victoria. We'll call up, have a conversation with her, explain the school, match you guys together to have a discussion, see if there's you're excited about taking that place, and that's how placement happens.
Fantastic. In terms of the community of teachers that you create each year, is there something, or probably a question, in terms of all these teachers you place in each year, are they like in touch with each other as a bit of a community?
Yeah.
Yeah,
big time. The TFA community, like we talk about the formal support, like that you get the coach from Teach for Australia, you get the academic mentor from ACU, you get the in-school mentor. Really, the best support is the people you do the program with. So they're big cohorts. You'll find your people within those cohorts. Like my best mates now are the people I went through the Teach for Australia program with. They understand what you're going through. It's a very supportive community. We do take great care in the recruitment process. So yeah, the people that you go through the program with end up being probably the major supports through the program.
Awesome. Question here from Julie. What challenges and perhaps opportunities do you see for the education sector into the future, Nick?
Well, teaching doesn't always get the best rap, particularly during what some of the stories that come out, but equally we're seeing through the pandemic how important teachers are. Like you have seen the amount of parents who will come out and say, I'll never take a teacher for granted again after having to homeschool my child. There is going to be a teacher shortage in this country, which is a problem, but equally that provides an opportunity as well. So school leadership is really something that is becoming an increased focus in terms of making sure that they're viable and sustainable careers. So there's a lot of opportunities in the education space, but really the challenge for the education sector more broadly is making teaching an attractive profession to bring in really high quality people, because like I said before, it's a really, really good profession. It's fun. Every day is different. It's purposeful, which is probably one of the main things. You are doing something that contributes to the betterment of society. So there are challenges. It's a tough job, but equally there's heaps of opportunities for your future career as well.
Speaking of opportunity, could you potentially shed some insight into what sort of remuneration students could expect? I assume it might differ based on state, maybe potentially.
No, absolutely. So first year remuneration ranges from 56,000 to 62,000, depending on where you're placed. So it's slightly higher in places like the Northern Territory. And Sam, remember that's 0.8 as well. So it's working for equivalent days.
Mm-hmm.
That goes up in the second year of the program as well. So in the first year, $56,000 to $62,000.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
And salary progression, is that something, again, I guess would depend on it. If they're staying with that particular school, is that sort of dependent on that school itself, or is it a particular progression you see across
No,
programs?
there's every expectation that once our associates finish the 2-year program and then go into the third year, they then go on to a full-time salary at the appropriate scale. And that's at the discretion of the school, but generally the 2 years experience that you've had is taken into account when they're thinking about the scale. So there's so many opportunities in the communities that we work in to get into leadership positions as well. And obviously that comes with its own remuneration incentives as well.
Changing gears a little bit to look more at the application process, because I'm sure students on the call today will love maybe a bit of leg up over others who haven't attended. So I know you mentioned earlier there's an interview that we have, and there's that selection process with a bit of a group assessment and like. Maybe to start off with, could you give a bit more insight into what sort of questions are asked in the interview?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the online application. So what we want to know in the online application, because that's the first step in particular, is why you want to join the program. So we do want people who want to help solve the problem of educational inequity. And we want you to have like an understanding of why we do and why you want to help, why you want to be part of the Teach for Australia program. And so everyone can go online and have a look and regurgitate what's online. But having that personal statement about why you want to join really helps us get to know you as a person as well. So we kind of want to know like how you've contributed to your society, how have you contributed to your community. Once we get into the online interview, it's much more behavioural and situational, which relates to our competencies. What I would say by way of advice is, again, speak to a recruitment and advocacy manager. The Venn diagram, the overlap between successful candidates and those who speak to our recruitment staff is really strong. We do things like running an application workshop. So we will give tips and hints about what you need to do, and you can find details about our events on our website. And there's also the 1%ers as well, Sam, like have someone proofread your work for spelling and grammar, because we want people who are standing up in front of the classroom, students who are already behind on literacy. We don't want to exacerbate those mistakes. So doing those little things like being able to, proofread your work becomes really important as well.
In terms of the group assessment process, the assessment center for that you run as well, I know you mentioned there's some group activities that happen and mock lesson plan, I think it was that you'd mentioned. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on what that looks like?
Yeah, so the selection day is really fun. I know it doesn't sound like it, but it is, having been through it, it is. So you have to do a 7-minute sample teaching lesson on a topic of your choice. 7 minutes will just fly by. Then there's a situation-based group activity as well with other candidates for that day. Then there's a third activity we kind of keep a bit close to our chest, Sam. As a bit of a wild card. But throughout the day, and again, I know it sounds bonkers, but it actually is fun. We'll have a Q&A with one of our alumni. We do actually make the effort to get to know you over the course of the day and for you to get to know us equally as well. So they're the major 2 activities that we do during our selection day.
In terms of minimum requirements as well, could you elaborate a little bit on, is there like a minimum grade level that you need to, is it 60% WAM or?
No, there's not. I mean, obviously there isn't. We do take a look at it. If you've failed a bunch of subjects, you might want to put in, you might want to mention what mitigating factors there were. There is a section of the application that allows for that. We do ask for your transcript, but that is to see your eligibility to teach subjects rather than look at your WAM. So that's predominantly why we want to look at your transcript. Minimum WAM? No.
Why is that out of interest, Nick? I'm sure many students might be like, oh, I would have expected my study score to be quite important. Why do you find that less of a driving factor?
Yeah, so we see the correlation between the successful teachers in our programs are the ones who meet our competencies, aren't necessarily the ones who have a certain WAM score, right? So we don't want to perpetuate inequality. So some students who might move from the country to your Melbourne unis, they might have to work 2 jobs to get by, and that might impact their studies. And so we want to see, that's an example of leadership, right? We want to see them against our competencies, not against the mark, which due to their personal circumstances, they may not have had as much control by, versus someone, for example, who, might not have to work during uni, who can spend their day in the law library. So yeah, it's very much we back our competencies and our candidates who meet our competencies to succeed in the program.
Fantastic. In regards to work rights and citizenship, are there any requirements around that for the Teach for Australia program?
Yep. Permanent residents and Australian citizens. Unfortunately, we can't take people on visas. So yeah, you have to be an Australian citizen or permanent resident.
And if you're applying for either one of those to be permanent residency, is there a deadline for when you have to have that approval in place?
Yeah, should have permanent residency in place by the time the initial intensive starts in November.
Yeah. In terms of when they are applying to the program as well, is there a certain person they should address their cover letter or the application in general to? And is that state specific as well, or how does that work?
The application form itself is an online form, and that will prompt you to answer a bunch of questions and things like that. So it's not a cover letter and CV style situation. We don't actually ask for a CV. You'll answer a bunch of questions. So personal questions like what are your details, home address, what you study, and then the questions that we have that relate to our competencies. But like I said, Sam, before you do that, you ought to talk to one of our recruitment and advocacy team who will be able to have a look at your transcript, give you a bit of advice. So, yep, you're eligible to teach these subjects, answer any further questions that you might have, give you a bit of advice about the application form and things like that. Best way to do that is to email apply@teachforaustralia.org.
Yeah. And after they've submitted the online application, are they able to go back and edit it at all, or is it just make sure it's right the first time?
You can write it, and then you can edit it up until the point you submit it.
Yep.
Once it's submitted, you can't go back and edit, but you can tinker away at it or leave it for 24 hours and come back to it with fresh eyes as well. So you can retrieve an existing application up until the point you've submitted it.
Yeah, I guess that's hence why they should get in touch with the recruitment team to get a bit of that assistance through that process, right? As well.
Yeah,
yeah,
100%. Yeah, because like a lot of grad programs, Sam, as you know, they have like, all right, we've got 12 spots this year. We've got 16 spots this year. We have as many spots as we can fill. If you meet our competencies, you will get into the Teach for Australia program. So you're not competing against a finite amount of people. You're competing against our competencies. And if you meet our competencies, you're assessed as to be someone who can make a real difference in Australian schools.
Fantastic. So is there any other programs that Teach for Australia run other than the leadership development program, particularly maybe for students who are early on in their degree or maybe not even at university just yet? So we run an online virtual internship through Forage.
which you'll be able to find more information on the Forage website about the Teach for Australia virtual internship. That's a really good way to demonstrate your knowledge of Teach for Australia and your commitment to vision and mission. And once people are in the program and they finish Teach for Australia and they're thinking about potentially going into school leadership, we also have our Future Leaders program. So that's for people who have completed Teach for Australia or any teaching background for that matter, but who are young school leaders, junior school leaders who want to move into more senior leadership positions. We also have that Future Leaders program as well.
Fantastic. I've got probably just one question left from my list. So unless there's any other questions coming through from the chat at all, left to run through, I might jump into my final question, Nick, which is, I mean, this has been a fantastic insight into the Teach for Australia program and motivations and the applications, you know, sort of criteria and the like. But I guess if you could summarize in one sentence why students should apply for the Teach Australia course, what would that be?
Yeah, it's really simple for me. If you're looking for something purposeful, if you're looking for a challenge with a conscience, Teach for Australia is something you should think about. So it is challenging, it is fun, but it's also purposeful. So that's what I always tell people. Like, I never personally found a legal career particularly purposeful. I found it challenging, but I wanted both. So if you want to go somewhere where conscience meets ambition and do something that's quite life-changing for yourself and for students, it's definitely worth considering. And just remember that every day is fun. Every day, I shouldn't say that. Not every day is fun, but on balance, being a teacher is enjoyable. And if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.
Awesome. Well, I think that just about wraps us up today, I reckon, Nick.
No, thank you. And
so
thanks to the students online for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for everyone's questions today as well. It's been a great session, and thanks for your great insight today, Nick. I guess that just about wraps us up, so I'll sort of call it quits there, and we will see you all at the next one. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.